Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 2 for this news report today. It's Tuesday, January 15th, 2013. My website is ggnonline.com and on YouTube, ddarko2012, ddarko2013. We left off with this article here talking about the economy. Americans feel austerity's bite as payroll taxes rise. I've gone through all the numbers and it doesn't, it hits everybody out pretty hard. Why Americans are broke and getting further in debt. So it goes on here and it says that many of the citizens of the U.S. are also living not just paycheck to paycheck, but short-term loan to short-term loan. So they've been borrowing just to meet payments on previous loans, and it builds on itself. It goes on and says people in tough economic situations fall into the poverty trap, borrowing money at ever higher interest rates, and a shell game to move or keep previous borrows at bay. The average debt for household earnings, $20,000 a year or less, more than doubled to $26,000. Let me read this again. The average debt for household earnings, $20,000 a year or less, more than doubled to $26,000 between 2001 and 2010 as people dig deeper, precisely because they long to escape. As the focus of the article notes, the tight belting or belt tightening was the easy part. The larger problem was cash flow. So the experiment showed that economic scarcity by itself, independent of personality or any other factors, fuels a drive to borrow recklessly. So it says the larger problem for this individual, 33-year-old, who had lost her public relations job was cash flow. After her unemployment insurance and savings ran dry, there was none. She says the usual explanations for reckless borrowing focus on people's character or social norms that promote free spending and instant gratification. This is the entire modern world. This is what we were talking about with Edward Bernays, creating a passive society, of consumers, right? That just are basically being told what they want, what they need. But recent research has shown that scarcity by itself is enough to cause this kind of financial self-sabotage. So sorry if you can hear these dogs in the background. They're my family's dogs, and they're just kind of play fighting. They're not stopping, so. But sorry for that in the background. Most Britons will lose out in pension shake-ups as new flat-rate payouts will mean majority get less, says experts. It's the biggest reform of state pensions since it was created, and people will have to make 35 years of national insurance contributions to qualify for more generous retirement payments. But it says by 2060, half of the pensioners will be worse off. It says under the new system, the state pension age, which used to be 60 for women and 65 for men, will increase in line with life expectancy. Again, this is the thing. It's already scheduled to rise to 67 by 2028. So it says it will increase as a typical Briton lives for longer, right? Well, wrong. Unless you have money and credit to pay for all the health care to counter the eugenics that is being carried out against you. So, like I said, you're going to work your shitty job to the day you die, and they're going to claim the whole time that we're living longer. But really what you're doing is you're living longer because you're putting all of your money into health insurance and the pharma complex, the health complex, to keep you going, keep you alive, so that you can keep going to work to pay off all your medical debt, health bills. Nice little cycle. So then you have 28% of Americans are rating their 401k plan. It says this trend has been in place since the financial takeover by the international elites, but this fact that it's accelerated is extremely disconcerting. So it goes on here as, first off, this is not the kind of behavior that would be witnessed in an economic recovery. And second, we need to remember the huge percentage of Americans on food stamps or disability a lot. It says here, as I discussed previously, many of them also have jobs. So essentially, a wage and a check from the government is still not enough to survive. So they still need to tap into their 401k plans. More than 1 in 4 American workers with 401ks or other retirement saving accounts use them to pay current expenses, new data shows. It says those in their 40s have been the most likely culprits. 1/3 are turning to such accounts for relief. It says the withdrawals, cash outs, loans drain nearly a quarter of the almost $300 billion that workers and employers deposit into their accounts each year. It goes on here and it says that those that withdraw money face hefty penalties. The costs are financially harmful to families, even as money management firms reap massive fees for handling retirement accounts that ultimately are not used for retirement. Hint, the bankers win again. Then we have Spain plunders 90% of Social Security fund to buy its own debt. We've actually covered this before, but it's back in there. As I said, Spain's been quietly tapping the country's richest piggy bank, the Social Security fund, It goes on and says 90% of the 65 billion euro fund has been invested in increasingly risky Spanish debt. So then we have hospitals stripped of cash bribes for death pathway and shakeup of this end-of-life regime. So some hospitals receive six-figure sums. And it goes on here and it says hospitals will no longer be able to profit simply by putting dying patients on the Liverpool care pathway. They say that they've been receiving six-figure sums for the controversial program. It goes on here and says that these bribes would have to stop unless it was shown suffering had been reduced. They fear that the incentives pressure doctors to use the pathway even when a patient's life may not be nearing its end. So yeah, this is like some little headlines recently, but it goes on hospitals bribed to put patients on pathway to death. Remember, there's already an article that I've covered before a couple of times about how NHS is putting people on the death pathway in order to cut savings in this tough economy, you know. Then you have the student loan bailout. Here it comes. So it says 2012 is the year the student loan bubble finally popped, while on one hand the relentlessly rising total federal student debt crossed almost $1 trillion as of September 30th and was growing at a pace that will have to put it over $1 trillion by the end of 2012. The one data point confirming the size, severity, and bursting of this latest debt bubble was a disclosure in late November by the Fed that the percentage of 90-plus day delinquent loans soared from under 9% to 11% in one quarter. So I remember actually covering that. But it says they learned that the federal government has now delivered yet another bailout program, this time focusing not on banks or homeowners, but but on those millions of Americans aged 18 to 80 that are drowning in student debt. Debt, incidentally, which has been used to pay for drugs, motorcycles, games, tattoos, not to mention countless iPhone products. It says, after all, it is only fair that the taxpayer-funded free-for-all bonanza must go on. So yet another taxpayer-funded bailout for those who bought things that they couldn't afford on credit, much like they were talking about the McMansions, homeowners who bought McMansions and decided not to pay their mortgage. So there's a chart, you can go in there and check it out with the dates. Then we have this, kind of ties in how college students think that they are more special than ever. Study reveals rocketing sense of entitlement on U.S. campuses. It goes on here and it says that young people's unprecedented level of infatuation was revealed in a new analysis of the American Freshman Survey, which has been asking students to rate themselves compared to their peers since 1966. Roughly 9 million people have taken the survey over the last 40 years. It goes on and says new data suggests that students today are convinced of their own greatness regardless of whether they've accomplished anything. So here's a little chart here. You can go in there and check that out. So a psychologist compiled data found over the last 4 years there's been a dramatic rise in the number of students who describe themselves as being above average in the areas of academic ability, drive to achieve, mathematical ability, and self-confidence. I seen the leadership and I noticed that it was kind of not really all that high. It says, but in appraising the traits that are considered less individualistic, cooperativeness, understanding of others, spirituality, the numbers either stayed at slightly decreased over the same period. While students are much more likely to call themselves gifted in writing abilities, objective test scores actually show that their writing abilities are far less than those of their 1960s counterparts. Also in decline is the amount of time spent studying, with little more than a third of students saying that study for 6 or more hours a week, compared to almost half of the students claiming the same in the late 1980s. It says though they may work less, a number of them had the drive to succeed rose sharply. It says these young egoists can grow up to be depressed adults. In 2006 study found that students suffer from ambition inflation as their increased ambitions accompany increasingly unrealistic expectations, which of course led to an increase in anxiety and depression. It says there's going to be a lot more people out there who don't reach their goals, putting in a 30% increase towards narcissism in students since 1979. We have teen pot use kills IQ. This is the recent study. Remember that? New study says no. So it goes on and says socioeconomic differences may explain earlier findings. It goes on here. It says over the summer, word that pot reduces IQ. You have a new investigation rejects that initial study. So Duke scientists have reviewed it, the IQ and pot habits of some 1,000 people in New Zealand between 13 and 38, and found that IQ scores sank among heavy users, but an Oslo researcher says differences in status could just have easily explained the apparent IQ drop. The study used computer simulations of IQ scores, how they can shift. Okay, it says here trends in his findings match those he found in his pot study. He said he's not sure his study overrules the original one, but it points to potential flaws. They said that they analyzed his results and they say that they're wrong, the Duke team that is, and outside experts say the original study hasn't been disproved beyond doubt. Young men are giving up on marriage, and women aren't women anymore, in quotes. So fewer young men in the U.S. want to get married than ever, while the desire for marriage is rising among young women, according to a Pew Research poll. They found that the women between the ages of 18 and 34 say that having a successful marriage is one of the most important things, rose from 28% to 37% since 97. The number of young adult men say the same thing dropped from 35% to 29% in the same time. So it goes on here and says that the findings have caught the attention of one U.S. writer who maintains that feminism, deeply entrenched in every segment of the culture, has created an environment in which young men find it more beneficial to simply opt out of a coupledom entirely. There's actually the War on Men, Suzanne Venker's article, which appeared on the website of Fox in late November, goes on and talks about feminist writers who have attacked her position, and goes on and says, where have all the good, meaning, marriageable men gone is the question much talked about lately in secular media. He points out for the first time in history that the number of women in the workforce has surpassed the number of men, while more women than men are acquiring university degrees. Says with feminism pushing them out of their traditional role of a breadwinner, protector, and provider, and divorce laws increasingly creating a dangerously precarious financial prospect for the men cut loose from marriage, men are simply no longer finding any benefit from it. She said that, quote, accidentally stumbled upon a subculture, end quote, of men who say that in no uncertain terms that they're never getting married. Says when she asked them, the answer is always the same. Women aren't women anymore. Feminism, which teaches women to think of men as the enemy, has made women angry and defensive, though often unknowingly. Says now the men have nowhere to go. Men want miniskirts and low-cut tops banned from the office for being too distracting, and women agree too. Men find cleavages very off-putting, according to a study, and women feel more confident wearing red in the office. So men want hot pants, miniskirts, whatever hot pants are, low-cut tops banned from office because they're too distracting. So it goes on, it says hot pants were named by the 32% as unacceptable, the 30% adding that anything with a leopard print should be banned. And Jodie Foster comes out of the closet in the Globe speech, so like I said, it's better late than never. But pro-family pastor withdraws from Obama inauguration after backlash from gay activists. I covered this before, but the Reverend basically is backed out after Obama picked him to deliver the benediction at the 21st inauguration. Is backed out after pressure by a campaign of homosexual activists. Femin stages topless gay rights protests in the Vatican. So it says the activists from the feminist movement, Feminist, stage a topless protest at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican to support gay rights as the Pope was reading his blessing. 4 women with an "In Gay We Trust" slogan written over their topless bodies scream, "Homophobes, shut up." It said one woman in the crowd started hitting them with an umbrella, calling them diabolical. Most of you are aware of this. Yahoo is saying it was put the numbers in thousands, but an estimated 1+ million marched in Paris against gay marriage plans. This is liberal France, of all places. Just, some people are just sick of it having shoved down their throat. It's over-representation, right? Like I said, like Zionists in the Congress, U.S. Congress, have, make up less than 1% of the population, have 30 to 50% of representation in Congress. So it's the same like with the social push. Heterophobia, often the irrational fear of heterosexuals, says usually experienced by a homosexual or bisexual who has had bad experiences with heterosexual coupling. There's actually transsexual phobia. So this writer actually had got Twitter attacked, and her article on transsexuals has been removed and an apology issued. And one politician asked for her to be fired. So this is the new world that you live in, If you say the wrong things or anything, you get fired. Amazing time-lapse video captures transsexuals' 3-year transformation from a man to a woman. It's pretty freaking freaky. Pretty messed up, too. Tricking men into that. Hope she's finally happy. Oh, God bless her. So what if she's not happy? Like that one person I talked about, that story that did that, and he said, I just wanted to be happy. And then when he wasn't happy anymore, he wanted to change back. Planned Parenthood quietly abandons the term pro-choice because it's become radioactive. It is crazy. Time magazine's cover says how abortion advocates have been losing the war, even though Planned Parenthood released its annual report marking a record number of abortions. And a woman pulls out of an abortion after seeing it smile.